Hello everyone, I am Dr. Deepak Kumar, Assistant Professor, Department of History, the Bhopal School of Social Sciences. In this series of lecture on the constitutional history of India, today we are going to discuss the Indian Council Act of 1861. Now, as we always do, let's look into the background of this act. If you remember, in the previous decade, in the year 1858, a very significant act was passed, which was the Government of India Act 1858, which ushered India into a new era in which India was being governed by the Crown directly. Now, this system lasted till India became a dominion in 1947. Now, from 1858 to 1947, this is a period of almost 90 years. From historical point of view, we can divide it into three parts. The first one is the period from 1858 to 1921, which saw the emergence of representative institutions in India. The second one is the period from 1921 to 1947. This saw the self-governing institutions in India for the first time. The third part from 1947 to 1950, in which India was given a dominion status. Now, there are two very distinct features which characterizes this entire period of 90 years, and these two features were previously absent. What are these features? The first one is the influence by national movement under the guidance of Indian National Congress. The second one is the influence by communalism. We can also see this from a different perspective, that there were three forces interacting with each other. These forces were the British imperialism, Indian nationalism, and the communalism. So, the first part of this 90-year period, that is 1858 to 1921, is of our concern. In this part, we see growing political consciousness among the intellectuals of India and the emergence of Indian National Congress. These two factors were responsible, which resulted in demand for the sons of the soils. Now, here sons of the soils means the native Indian people, which were previously excluded from participating in the government. So, they were demanding that they should be given a share in it. So, Indians wanted that they should get adequate representation, especially in the Legislative Council and also in the Indian Civil Service. Now, British Parliament positively responded to these demands by enlarging the legislature from time to time and also by increasing the number of Indian representations in them. However, British control remained absolute and unquestioned in every branch of the government, whether it was the central government or the provincial government or the local government. The executive remained totally irresponsible to the legislature. Now, before we discuss the major provisions of this act, let me give you a brief overview of this act. Now, the Indian Council Act of 1861 basically provided a framework of internal administration in India, and it also provided for the representative institution in India for the first time. This was a big step. Governor General's Executive Council, the provision stated that they should have some Indians as the non-official members. This act also started or initiated a process of decentralization by restoring the legislative powers back to Madras and Bengal presidencies. This act also provided for the statutory recognition to portfolio system. Now, portfolio system or the division of department was a new phenomena, and we will discuss in next slides. Now, let us discuss the major provisions provided by this act one by one. In regard to the Executive Council of the Governor General, the act provided that it was to consist of 5 ordinary members And out of these 5 ordinary members, 3 of them were to be appointed by the Secretary of State for India with agreement or concurrence of the India Council. Now, the qualifications were that the person or the member should have at least 10 years service under the Crown or the companies. The next provision is that for the appointment or as the law member, a person must have been either a barrister of England or Ireland, or he should be a member of the Faculty of Advocates in Scotland of not less than 5 years standing. The Act provided that the Commander-in-Chief was to be the extraordinary member, and he should have rank and position next to the Governor General, and all the members were to hold 5 years office. The Governor General was also authorized to make rules for the conduct of its business, and this basically enabled him to introduce for the first time the portfolio system. Portfolio system, or the division of departments, is basically in which every member was given a different department to head, and this basically increased the efficiency of the government. Governor General was provided to enlarge his council for the purpose of making law by adding not less than 6 and not more than 12 members. He was also authorized that not less than 1/2 of the members who were appointed were to be non-official for a 2-year term. Now, fortunately, some of the Indians were also included, and these were Raja of Banaras, the Maharaja of Patiala, and Sir Dinkar Rao. Now, let's discuss the Legislative Council's power. The Legislative Council was authorized to make laws for all persons, which included Indians, Britishers, foreign nationals, and all courts of justice. And Legislative Council could make laws basically for all places and things within the territories of British India. But the Legislative Council could not pass any law repealing or amending any provisions of any act passed by Parliament affecting India. This act also provided that Governor General's assent was necessary for any bill to be passed. The Governor General had power to give his assent or withhold his assent and to revoke his assent, but only Crown can disallow any bill. Governor General was also given a power to issue ordinances on his own authority independently of the Legislative Council. Now, this act was the first step towards the legislative devolution. If you remember, in 1833, through Charter Act, the powers of the Bombay and Madras presidencies, basically the legislative powers of the Madras and Bombay presidencies, were revoked. Now, the Indian Council Act of 1861 basically restored these powers back to Madras and Bombay presidencies, and their governor were required to expand their councils by the addition of the Advocate General of the presidency. Not less than 4 and not more than 8 other members can also be included, and whom not less than 1/2 were to be non-official, and their term was also fixed at 2 years. The provisions provided by this act basically were very limited. They provided a limited powers to local legislature as they provided in the central legislature. So, just like the central legislature, local legislature also had few or limited powers. Their function was restricted to legislation only. Even in the field of legislation, they could make laws for the peace and good government only, and of their territories only. Now, the impact of the 1861 Act, this act was very significant. This act helped bring some changes in the legislative system, and another aspect was that this act is significant because it included some Indians, which created new possibilities and hopes for the country. This act also introduced for the first time the division of departments, which was an organized way to improve functioning and improve the efficiency. Although this act encouraged Indian representations, but there were no major changes or results of this inclusion. Despite all these changes, this act failed because the final ruling power lied with the Governor General, or we can say that the Governor General had the ultimate authority. So, we can say that this act did not lead to any major improvement. However, we can also say that the Indian Council Act of 1861 was a milestone in the history of constitution in India. So, these were the major provisions of the Indian Council Act of 1861. Thank you all.